I found the letters in a place no one was ever meant to look, tucked behind the loose board of an old cedar chest, the one I had promised myself I'd never open again. The woods still smelled faintly of him, or maybe that's what my memory wanted to believe. I sat on the floor, knees creaking, the afternoon sun slanting across the room in strips of gold and dust. It had been almost 50 years since I last saw his face, yet the moment my fingers brushed those yellowed envelopes, I swear I felt the ghost of his hand reaching back. His name was Elliot, a boy with ocean eyes and a laugh that could calm the storms I used to carry inside. We were young, painfully young, the kind of young that makes you think forever is something you can hold on to if you just try hard enough. But time, I've learned, has a cruel sense of humor. It keeps what it wants and erases what it doesn't. When Elliot left for college across the country, we promised each other the impossible, that we'd write, that we'd wait, that love could stretch across miles like a thread that would never break. I wrote to him every week. I remember sealing those envelopes with my breath, as if my words would travel faster that way. But he never wrote back, not once. People told me to move on. My mother said, "Amanda, life doesn't stop just because someone forgets to remember you." And maybe she was right. I married someone else, Charles, kind, dependable, the sort of man who never made me cry, but never made me tremble either. I built a good life with him. Children, a home, laughter in the kitchen. But deep down, in the quiet hours of the night when the house fell still, I sometimes wondered where Elliot had gone, whether he ever thought of me, whether those words I sent into the void had ever found him. So when I pulled out those letters, his letters, all these years later, my first feeling wasn't joy. It was confusion. The envelopes were unopened, but each one bore my name in his handwriting, that same looping cursive that had once traced my skin in the moonlight. He had written, dozens of them, some torn at the edges, some water-stained, all sealed, unsent. For a long time I just stared at them. My hands trembled, and I thought of all those nights I'd waited for the mail, how every disappointment had chipped away at something tender inside me. I wanted to open them all at once, to devour every word he never gave me. But something inside whispered, "Be careful, Amanda. Sometimes the truth you've longed for all your life can hurt more than the silence that protected you." I carried the letters outside to the garden that had been my refuge since Charles passed. The air was cool, the sky the color of fading lilacs. I set them on the small wooden table by the bench where I used to sit with him, Charles, not Elliot, and watch the paper edges flutter in the evening breeze. Why now? Why had I found them after all these years? Who hid them? Had he meant for me to find them? Or had someone else, his family maybe, discovered them after his death and returned them quietly, out of guilt or love? I thought about the way time loops around on itself. How unfinished stories have a way of finding you when you least expect it. Maybe that's what this was, time's cruel joke, reminding me that love never really disappears. It just waits for you to open the wrong drawer at the wrong moment. I picked one letter up, my name, Amanda Lee, written in blue ink, slightly smudged as if he'd cried over it. My heart began to race, but I didn't open it, not yet. I pressed it to my lips, and for a moment I was 19 again, barefoot in the grass, listening to Elliot play his guitar by the lake, promising me he'd come back for me, but he hadn't. He never did. I closed my eyes and tried to remember his voice, the way he said my name, like a secret he was afraid to lose. But memory is tricky. It fades, softens the edges, fills the blanks with what you wish had happened. Maybe I wasn't remembering him at all. Maybe I was remembering the girl I used to be, the one who believed love letters could hold the world together. The wind picked up, and one of the letters slipped from the pile, landing near my feet. I bent to pick it up, and that's when I noticed something strange. Every envelope was sealed, but none were stamped. They'd never been sent. A sound left my throat, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. All these years I thought he'd forgotten me, but he hadn't. He'd written and never mailed them. That was worse somehow. It meant he'd held the same ache, the same longing, but chose silence over confession. I wondered why. Was it guilt, pride, fear, or maybe love so deep he couldn't bear to reopen the wound? My heart began to ache in a way it hadn't in years. I sat there, surrounded by ghosts of words unsaid, and I felt the weight of both our silences pressing down. All those years of wondering, and the answer was sitting right in front of me, sealed away like a time capsule of regret. I thought of the question I never stopped asking myself. Would I have lived differently if I had known he still loved me? The sky began to darken, and I knew I couldn't keep them. These letters weren't meant to be read. They were meant to stay unsent, unfinished echoes of a love that never truly lived. So I fetched a small metal bowl from the kitchen, the one I used to burn dried sage in during winter. I placed the letters inside, one by one, each thud a heartbeat, each whisper of paper a farewell. I struck a match. The flame flickered, hesitant at first, then caught, orange and hungry. The smoke curled upward, carrying decades of unsaid words into the fading sky. The firelight danced across my face, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. Not for Elliot, not even for Charles, but for the woman I had been, the one who waited by the window every day, believing silence was a kind of love. As the last letter turned to ash, I whispered into the night, "Goodbye, my almost." The wind carried the ashes into the darkness, scattering them like forgotten confessions. And in that moment, I felt something shift. Not peace exactly, but a kind of stillness. A space where grief had finally burned itself out. I don't know if fire sets you free, or if it just gives your pain a prettier ending. Maybe it's both. Would you have opened them, or would you have let them burn too? When morning came, the garden still smelled faintly of smoke. The ashes from the night before clung to the rim of the metal bowl like secrets that refused to leave. I sat on the porch with my tea, staring at them, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Maybe I should have read at least one letter. Maybe the answers I'd been chasing my whole life had been right there, waiting quietly in Elliot's words. But no, some truths once opened can never be folded back. The neighborhood was waking up. The distant hum of cars, children shouting on their way to school, the mail truck crawling down the road. Funny, I thought. 50 years later, and I still flinched at the sound of mailboxes closing. I used to wait for that sound every morning, hoping one day it would bring his name back to me. And now? Now it only reminded me of everything that never arrived. I almost didn't notice her at first. Lydia, my neighbor's granddaughter, walking toward my gate with her auburn hair tied back in a loose braid. She was carrying something, a small box wrapped in faded fabric. "Good morning, Mrs. Green," she said softly. "My grandma asked me to give this to you." I frowned, setting my cup down. "Who's your grandma, dear?" "Mrs. Carmichael," she said, smiling nervously. "She used to live down the street from the Hensleys. She said you might understand." Mrs. Carmichael. The name hit me like a quiet echo. I hadn't heard it in decades. She used to be Elliot's next-door neighbor back when we were young. I took the box from Lydia, my hands trembling. "Did she tell you what's inside?" She shook her head. "She just said it belonged to someone named Elliot." The world tilted a little beneath me. My breath caught. I waited for Lydia to leave before carrying the box inside. My fingers hovered over the fabric for a long time. It was soft, like old linen, the color of dusk. When I finally unwrapped it, I found another bundle of letters, smaller this time, carefully tied with a blue ribbon. My name was written across the top one again, but these were different. The handwriting wasn't as steady. The ink was darker, the strokes heavier, as if written with trembling hands. I sat at my kitchen table, heart pounding. I didn't burn these. I couldn't. I took the first one, slid my thumb under the flap, and began to read. My dearest Amanda, I don't know if these words will ever find you. I've written you more times than I can count, but every letter ends up back in my drawer. Maybe I'm a coward. Maybe I just don't deserve to disturb your peace. But you should know, your letters never reached me. Your mother came by the week after you sent the first one. She said it was kinder to let you forget me. She said you were happy, that you'd moved on. I believed her. God help me, I believed her. And I stopped writing back. But I never stopped loving you. The words blurred before my eyes. My mother had done it. I pushed the letter away, my heart hammering. I couldn't believe it. My mother had told him not to write, told him I was happy without him. All those years of silence, those empty mailboxes, the heartbreak I'd carried like a scar, it had all been built on her lie. I reached for another letter, desperate for more. Sometimes I see you in my dreams, standing by the lake in that yellow dress. I try to call out, but the words won't come. Maybe that's how it's meant to be. Maybe love is supposed to hurt when it's real. If you ever read this, please know I tried. I truly did. My tears fell onto the page, smearing the ink. I couldn't stop them. The house felt too quiet, too small to hold everything I was feeling. Anger, sorrow, longing, all tangled together like roots growing through old wood. I thought of my mother then. She'd passed years ago, peacefully, surrounded by family. I had sat by her bed, holding her hand, whispering that I forgave her for the little things like missed birthdays, harsh words, quiet judgments. But this was something else. This was the theft of a lifetime. All those years I had blamed Elliot for leaving, cursed his silence, convinced myself he'd simply stopped caring, when in truth he had been reaching for me, letter after letter, only to be shut out by the woman who claimed she wanted to protect me. I stood up, pacing the kitchen, clutching the letters like they were my heartbeat. I wanted to scream, to ask the empty walls why love always came with conditions, why truth always hid behind good intentions. After a while, I went out to the garden again. The ashes were still there, blackened remnants of what I'd burned the night before. I knelt beside them, holding one of Elliot's letters close. "I'm sorry," I whispered, voice breaking. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." The wind rustled the trees, soft and mournful. Then I remembered something, how my mother used to tell me, "Amanda, sometimes you have to destroy the past to protect the future." Maybe she'd believed that. Maybe she thought keeping Elliot away was saving me from pain. But all it did was make the pain last longer. I sat there for hours, reading every letter until my eyes ached. Each one told me a little more about the man I'd loved and the years we'd both lost to silence. He'd tried to find me, written from different towns, even from a hospital once. "I'm sick now," one letter read. "Nothing too serious, I hope. But if I don't make it, promise me this: burn the letters. Don't let anyone pity what could have been. Some loves are meant to stay unfinished." I closed my eyes, clutching that final page to my chest. It was as if he'd known I would one day hold them, decades too late. As the sun began to set, I whispered to the fading light, "You're free now, Elliot. And maybe I am too." But deep down, I knew freedom doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it just means learning to live with what's left behind. Would you still forgive someone who stole your truth, even if they did it out of love? I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window with the letters spread across my lap, the faint lamplight trembling against the paper like ghosts that refused to rest. Every time I tried to close my eyes, I saw him, Elliot, sitting somewhere miles away, pen in hand, pouring out words that never found me. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I needed to find him, or whatever was left of him. The town cemetery was just a few miles from where I'd grown up. I hadn't been there in years, not since my mother's funeral. The iron gates creaked when I pushed them open, their rust whispering secrets older than I was. The path wound between tall oaks, their roots breaking through the gravel like old bones. I carried the letters in a tin box, holding them close as if they could still change something. I found his grave near the back, under a crooked willow tree. The name carved into the stone made my knees weaken. Elliot James Harper, 1942, 1974. He died young, too young. I knelt, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. The stone was cold, rough, and weathered. Beneath his name were the words, "Forever waiting." I don't know who chose them, but they sliced through me like glass. "Elliot," I whispered, "I'm here." The air was still. No birds, no wind, just silence, the kind that hums in your bones. I opened the box and laid the letters beside his grave. "You wrote to me," I said, my voice shaking, "all this time, and I never knew. I thought you'd forgotten me. I thought you'd moved on." My throat tightened. "But you didn't, did you?" For a long while I said nothing. I just sat there, listening to the hum of the earth. I could almost feel his presence, faint and familiar, as if time had folded in on itself for a moment and we were young again, me in my yellow dress, him laughing by the lake. When the first tear fell, I didn't stop it. I let it fall onto the soil. "I burned your letters, Elliot, the ones I did find. I thought I was freeing myself, but all I did was erase the proof that you loved me. I wish I'd kept them. I wish I'd waited one more day, one more hour." The wind picked up then, gently stirring the grass. It carried the faint scent of lilac, just like the cologne he used to wear. I smiled through the tears. Maybe this was his answer. Then I saw her, Mrs. Carmichael. She must have come quietly, her cane tapping lightly on the stones as she walked. Her face had aged, but her eyes, they still held that same knowing softness. "I thought I'd find you here," she said, voice thin but steady. I stood, brushing the dirt from my skirt. You knew him. You had his letters." She nodded. "He left them with me. Said if anything ever happened to him, someone should make sure you got the truth. But your mother came to me first. She begged me not to give them to you, said it would ruin your marriage." "My marriage?" I laughed bitterly. "It was already ruined, Mrs. Carmichael. I married a good man, but I never gave him my whole heart. How could I when it was buried here?" Her eyes softened. "Your mother meant well, Amanda. She thought she was protecting you." "Protecting me?" I whispered. "From love, from truth. She stole my years, my forgiveness, my chance to say goodbye." Mrs. Carmichael sighed and leaned against her cane. "I kept them because I thought she might be right. But when she passed, I knew the truth needed to find its way home." I looked down at the grave again. "And it did," I murmured. "Just too late." The old woman reached out and touched my hand. "Some truths arrive late because the heart isn't ready sooner." I wanted to believe that, but all I felt was the weight of everything I'd lost. Letters, laughter, a lifetime that could have been. Mrs. Carmichael left after a while, leaving me alone with him again. I sat by his grave until the sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and rose. I took one letter, his last, and read it out loud, my voice trembling through the quiet air. If we never find our way back to each other, I hope you still smile at the sound of my name. I hope you remember that love, no matter how lost, still existed once. And that was enough. I folded the page carefully and tucked it beneath the stone. You were enough, I whispered. You always were. The light faded, and I realized I'd been holding my breath for years, for words that never came, for closure that never arrived. Now that it had, I didn't feel peace. I felt hollow. But maybe hollow was where healing began. As I walked back down the path, I thought about forgiveness, the kind we never get to give. It's strange, isn't it? We spend so much of our lives waiting for someone to say, I'm sorry, when sometimes the only way forward is to whisper, I forgive you anyway. When I reached the gate, I turned for one last look at the willow tree, its branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. Goodbye, Elliot, I said, and thank you for loving me, even in silence. When I returned home from the cemetery, the world felt heavier, yet strangely quiet. My old house, the one Elliot and I had dreamed of filling with laughter, stood still like a photograph frozen in time. Every corner of it held whispers, echoes of conversations, footsteps, memories that refused to fade. I placed the tin box on the table. The few surviving letters, worn and fragile, stared back at me like tiny ghosts. I thought of burning them again, and for real this time, not out of anger, but as a farewell. But then, hadn't I burned enough of my past already? I made myself a cup of chamomile tea. The steam rose and danced, curling like smoke, the same kind that had carried his words away once before. I sat by the window, my hand trembling as I lifted the cup, watching the neighborhood go about its life. Children played, dogs barked, a young couple argued on the sidewalk. The world hadn't stopped when Elliot died, when I lost him, or when I buried his memory. It never does. The silence was the cruelest part. I had grown old in that silence, letting it seep into my bones. I realized I hadn't spoken his name aloud in nearly 30 years until today. Elliot, I whispered again, as if tasting a forbidden word. It felt both sharp and sweet. Then the phone rang, a sound that startled me from my thoughts. It was my daughter, Marlene. Mom, she said, her voice bright but rushed. I was thinking about coming by this weekend. Maybe we could clean out the attic, get rid of some old things. I almost said no. That attic was a museum of my life, untouched, sacred. But something inside me shifted. Maybe it was time to open those boxes, face what I'd hidden even from myself. That would be nice, I said softly. Bring the kids. After she hung up, I looked around the living room. The sunlight fell through the lace curtains, painting soft patterns on the floor. I remembered when Elliot and I first picked them out, laughing over coffee at a corner store. It was such a small moment, but now it felt like everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were filled with fire, the same flames that once devoured his letters. Only this time, I saw my younger self standing in front of them, crying, begging the fire to stop, but it just roared louder, brighter. Then Elliot appeared, standing beyond the flames, holding out his hand. I tried to reach him, but my fingers turned to ash before I could touch him. I woke up crying, clutching the bedsheet like it was his hand. When morning came, I went to the attic before Marlene arrived. Dust hung in the air, thick and golden, like the ghosts of yesterday. I found boxes marked with old dates, my wedding, my children's births, letters from friends long gone. And then, buried deep beneath yellowed quilts, I found something I hadn't seen in decades, a photograph of Elliot and me. We were young, laughing, standing by the lake. His arm was around my shoulder, my eyes were closed, and you could see the way our hands fit, like two halves of one life. My chest tightened. I sat there for a long time, staring at it. When Marlene arrived, she saw me sitting on the attic floor with the picture in my lap. "Who's that, Mom?" she asked. "An old friend," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled, curious. "You were beautiful." "I was loved," I replied. We spent the day sorting through the attic, packing away memories into boxes labeled Keep and Donate. But when Marlene left that evening, I went back up alone. I held the photograph again and placed it beside Elliot's last letter on the table. The paper was so thin, I could almost see the outline of his handwriting through it. That night, I lit a single candle. I didn't burn anything, not this time. Instead, I spoke to him as if he were sitting right there. "Elliot," I said softly, "I forgive you for leaving, for not finding a way back. And I forgive myself for not being brave enough to fight for us." The candle flickered. A tear fell onto the table, catching the flame's light. "Do you think letting go means forgetting?" I asked the empty room. "Because I can't. I don't think love dies, Elliot. I think it just changes shape." Outside, a soft rain began to fall, tapping against the glass. I looked out the window and smiled faintly. It was raining the day I met him, too. He had given me his coat and said, "One day you'll owe me a story for this." I guess this was it, the story I owed him. Maybe that's all love really is. Stories left behind in the ashes, waiting for someone to tell them. It's strange how quiet forgiveness is. You imagine it as thunder, as some grand release that shakes your bones. But when it came to me, it was no louder than the rustle of the candle flame beside Elliot's old letter. Just a sigh, just peace. Days passed after that night. Marlene came by again, and we finished clearing the attic. I tucked the photograph of Elliot and me inside my bedside drawer. Not hidden, not displayed, but home. For years I'd tried to erase him, to burn every trace of what we'd been. But now I realized love doesn't vanish when it's scorched. It lingers, softer, like smoke in fabric. You carry it with you even when you think you've washed it all away. One morning I went to the garden, my little sanctuary of overgrown roses and uneven bricks. The air was sweet with autumn, that gentle kind of chill that sits between warmth and sorrow. I sat on the wooden bench that Elliot once built for me, the one that leans ever so slightly to the left. It creaked beneath me, complaining softly, as old things do. I took out the last unburned letter. His words had faded with time, the ink bleeding into the paper like veins of regret. I traced each word with my trembling finger. "If I could start again, Amanda, I'd come back sooner. I'd tell you that leaving wasn't forgetting. It was cowardice dressed as reason." My heart cracked all over again. He had written, after all. He just never sent it. I looked up at the clouds. Heavy, beautiful, indifferent. "You should have sent it, Elliot," I whispered, smiling through my tears. "I would have forgiven you." Then something inside me shifted, quiet but sure. I realized I had been waiting my whole life for someone else to give me closure, when maybe I was the one who had to write it myself. So I fetched a pen and one of my old yellowed notepads. My handwriting was shaky now, but every word felt deliberate, necessary. "Dear Elliot, I thought burning your letters would free me, but it only made me your ghost. I've spent years haunted by ashes, by what could have been. But today I finally understand. Forgiveness isn't owed, it's chosen. I choose to forgive you. I choose to forgive myself, and I choose to live the rest of my days remembering the warmth, not the fire." I folded the note and placed it beside the candle. Then, for the first time in 40 years, I laughed, a small, broken, beautiful laugh, because somehow, even after everything, it still felt like he was near. That evening, Marlene and her children visited again. The house was full of noise, the kind of sound I'd once thought I'd never hear again. Laughter, footsteps, the television humming low in the background. My granddaughter Ellie asked me to tell her a story before bed. What kind of story? I asked. The kind that makes people cry, she said with a grin. I chuckled. Ah, you're after one of Grandma's sad ones, huh? She nodded. I looked at her. So young, so alive, her eyes wide with the same curiosity I used to have when I believed love was always enough. Well then, I said, smoothing her hair back gently. Once, a young woman fell in love with a man who couldn't love her the way she needed. She thought fire could erase him, but all it did was remind her that love, even when lost, still leaves its warmth behind. Ellie blinked up at me. That's sad, Grandma. Yes, darling, I said softly, but it's also true. After she fell asleep, I sat by the window again. The moon hung low, silver and forgiving. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Good night, Elliot." For the first time, it didn't hurt. Maybe love doesn't end with goodbye. Maybe it just changes form, from letters to ashes to silence and finally to peace. And peace, I've learned, doesn't ask for permission. It just arrives one quiet evening, sits beside you, and stays. I leaned back in my chair, the neon light from my sign outside flickering faintly through the glass. Beloved Grandma. It glowed warm against the night, humming softly like an old memory that refuses to fade. So here I am, Amanda, telling you this because maybe you too have burned something you wish you hadn't. Maybe you've held on to words that were never said. Maybe you've been waiting for an apology that will never come. But listen to me, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to write it yourself. Because fire may erase paper, but it never truly erases love. Tell me, if you found the letters of the one who broke you, would you read them or burn them again? This is Beloved Grandma, where every ember holds a story and every heart learns to forgive its own fire.